as you can see, it is going to be another Disney versus original work, and yes, today is Alice in Wonderland, and boy do I have a lot to cover for you guys. But let me get a few things out of the way that are fairly similar to both of these works. And one thing is that in this particular one, I'm not really going to mention characters, because for the most part I believe that the characters sort of are pretty much the same, I think, for the most part, because again, the one that may be slightly different is the way they portray Alice, but for the most part, the characters are fairly structured in the same way. You know, you have Alice, who is basically just a rational person in an irrational world, and everything else is sort of irrational and doesn't make sense. So, for the most part, characters are pretty much the same, and I'm pretty sure if once you read the story, you will probably get that sense of, yeah, they're pretty much kind of the same. But basically, everything that encompasses within these characters, being the plot and sort of what happens, is somewhat different. And I mean, somewhat is probably an understatement, because there's a lot of stuff to cover. But basically what you have to understand, though, is that the reason why this one in particular is unique, Alice in Wonderland, is because Disney decided to do Through the Looking Glass and The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland, and sort of combine them together to sort of create this meshed sequence of events that happen as Alice is going throughout her journey in Wonderland. So for the most part, that's told differently, because again, they're combining the two works together, and I'll try to explain that as I continue on. But basically what I'm going to highlight in this review, and what I really want to talk about, is basically just the plot, because for the most part, the plot, and maybe sort of like, I guess, the images, could be said that it's a little bit different, because again, this is movies and animation are a totally different medium than just 1800s writing, so definitely going to get a different sense of how the worlds are. But for the most part, I think it's just important to highlight a lot of these differences, because these differences, I think, are what make each of these works particularly interesting, and you'll kind of see what Disney decided to incorporate or use, and what the book chose to go with. So again, just something to consider before I dive into explaining everything. And I also wanted to just make sure that, again, this may go a little bit long. I will try to keep it as minimum as possible. My technology is very limited, but I will try to make it as short as I can. But I don't want to like rush it and then people don't understand. So I just want to make sure that people understand that I am going to try to explain it. It's just, it may take a longer time for me to explain everything, because there is a lot of differences here, and it's a lot to cover. So just wanted to have you keep that in mind. Now, basically, what you have to know about the originals in going into this is that they're by that both Through the Looking Glass and The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland are based on stories written by Charles Ludwig Dachshund under the pseudonym Lewis Carroll, or I guess you could say pen name. So everybody usually associates the actual name, the name Lewis Carroll, and they say that's who the author is, but that's really not his real name. But again, something to keep in mind, and at least I thought that was kind of interesting, because usually people have kept it, as far as Disney is concerned, they've kept the actual name and they haven't changed their name to sort of hide their identity. So just something to consider. So for the most part, the story in the Disney version as well as in the original version sort of opens up in the same. They have Alice, who is sort of, bored with sort of the what's going on in the real world, and you have a point where she finally sees a rabbit, and again, this is where she starts dreaming, and the reason being her being bored is, well, because her sister's kind of tried to bring her up and raise her into sort of the English lifestyle of the time, and obviously that's probably not the most interesting thing in the world for a young child to want. So obviously she would want to follow something that's sort of interesting. A rabbit that's all of a sudden late and wearing some clothes. So basically, both stories do come and start the same way. And so she falls into the rabbit hole. Again, pretty much the same idea. And in the original story, she comes across multiple doors. And these doors don't talk, but in the Disney version there is only one door, and that one door talks. And he's sort of like helping her, trying to find her way so she can go through the door, so she can follow the rabbit, which again is pretty much the goal for her. And basically they have the same thing where she drinks something, she shrinks, she eats a cake, and she gets bigger. Yeah, it basically plays out in the same way. And then when she does get bigger, because at one point she shrinks and then she's too small, and then then she goes to a bigger size, and then she's too big, and then she starts to cry, same thing in the original, feeling helpless, a helpless child, and basically all she does is she cries, and then she has tears, and basically in the original story it says that she shrinks down again, because again she's big and this is what causes her to have really big tears. She shrinks down by a fan she picked up. Sort of interesting and very, very random. I think I can describe the Lewis Carroll version as being very random, whereas the Disney version you'll see is more kind of consistent, in that she does pick up the drink that she had before and she drinks the rest of it in order to shrink down to size. And then she comes across animals, and again this is similar to the original work where she comes across animals as she's trying to get through that one door. And basically when all the animals sort of hit dry land, this dodo suggests that the animals run in a circle with no clear winner in order to get themselves dry. Similar again to the original, where all the animals being run by the dodo, they basically go in a circle in order to dry, and then Alice is just kind of like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. And basically it explains it differently how she kind of gets out of this scenario. In the original, Alice eventually frightens all the animals away unwittingly by talking about her moderately ferocious cat. That's how the animals decide, okay, we shouldn't like run in the circle anymore. In the Disney version, she basically sees the rabbit, and then she suddenly just starts to get out of the circle on her own, and then just lets all the other animals just, yeah, we're just gonna go around in a circle still. And just sort of leaves them. And this is where the Disney version kind of takes off sort of on its own a bit. In the Disney version, she gets out of the circle by following the rabbit, and she runs into Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Now, Tweedledee and Tweedledum are characters from The Looking Glass. They're not characters from the Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. This is something that Disney decided to incorporate because they thought it was interesting. And basically, it's played out in the same way. They're like these sort of chubby twins, and basically they tell her about the story of the walrus and the carpenter, and they basically use the similar lines from the movie, like cabbages and kings, and sealing wax, and they just say like random stuff pretty much throughout as they're explaining the story to Alice. And again, that's played up and has the same idea as Through the Looking Glass. that same scenario or part. And basically that's what ends up happening. But in the original version, it goes sort of straight into what happens later on after the Tweedledum and Tweedledee thing happens in the Disney version. So basically, in the original version, the White Rabbit appears again in search of the Duchess's glove and fan. Mistaking her for his maidservant, Marianne, he orders Alice to go into the house and retrieve them. But once she gets inside, she starts growing. The horrified rabbit orders his gardener, Bill the Lizard, to climb on the roof and go down the chimney. Outside, Alice hears the voices of animals that have gathered to gnaw at her giant arm. The crowd hurls pebbles at her, which turn into little cakes. Alice eats them, and they reduce her size again. So basically, the scene that I'm talking about is the one after Tweedledee and Tweedledum, where she ends up at the rabbit's house, and basically it does sort of play out similarly. You know, the rabbit does mistake her for Marianne. He tells her to go find his gloves. They're not the Duchess's gloves, they're his gloves. And when Alice goes into the house, it's not that she just suddenly just grows. She actually eats something, and then that results in her growing in the Disney version. And then you'll see how the dodo that was ordering all the other animals earlier in the Disney version, and as well as in the original version, he comes into play in the Disney version again, and he basically tries to figure out a way to get sort of Alice out, because the rabbit's basically like screaming out of control because he's like, I don't want this woman in my, I don't want this monster in my house. And basically the dodo is the one who decides and sees the lizard, Bill the Lizard, again, it's the same character, and basically tells him to use his ladder to go up to the chimney and try to somehow, I guess, you know, scare the monster out. That's the whole idea. And the lizard sort of does this sort of against his will, and you will see how that plays out in the Disney version. And basically he goes down the chimney, but then once he goes down the chimney, Alice sneezes, and basically the sneezing causes him to go back out from where he came, back up from the chimney, and basically we never hear or see the lizard for pretty much the entire thing. And I thought that was interesting because and then the thing is too is that Alice uses those same cakes to, I think, to get herself back to size in the original work, but in the Disney work she kind of uses her wits with everything else that's around her, and she sees a carrot and she's like, I think I should eat something, because if I eat something in this world, it will help. And then she eats the carrot, and then it brings her back to normal. And then basically that's how that sort of shenanigans ends for both versions. She's reduced to the same size again, and then she goes on to the next craziness. And the next craziness in the Disney version is actually she comes across some flowers, and basically these flowers, there ends up being a lot of misinterpretation. The flowers are basically sort of representation of women, because all the flowers are women, and they sort of kind of misunderstand Alice and take her as to be something that she isn't, and basically she just moves from that one spot to the caterpillar, which again, after this happens in the book with the whole her shrinking back to size from being in the rabbit's house, she goes to the next absurdity, which is the caterpillar. And in the Disney work, it's the flowers and then the caterpillar. And then basically the caterpillar story sort of plays out in a similar way. Like Alice does sort of question herself, like she does in the book. You know, like, why am I here? What's the point? And the only thing that really plays out differently is that the caterpillar does tell her, like, if she wants to, like, grow to, like, a normal size, because, again, she did shrink really small. He says that, you know, you should just take, you know, each side of the mushroom, and then one side will make you grow bigger and one will make you grow smaller. And the thing is in the Disney version, he actually turns into a butterfly. And in the original, he just stays a caterpillar, and he just tells her, yeah, you just need to take the mushroom, like I say. And then you see the same thing happen with, you know, when she does take some of the mushroom and then she does grow big. You know, there is a bird that mistakes her as a serpent, and you have that whole oddity ensues, similar to the book. Again, this is kind of the same thing, pretty much. But the way that she comes across the Cheshire Cat is rather different in the original tale. In the original tale, she comes across a fish footman who has an invitation for the Duchess of the house, which he delivers to a frog footman. Alice observes this transaction, and after perplexing conversation with the frog, lets herself into the house. The Duchess's cook is throwing dishes and making a soup that has too much pepper, which causes Alice and the Duchess and her baby to sneeze. Alice is given the baby by the Duchess, and to her surprise, the baby turns into a pig. The Cheshire Cat appears in a tree, directing her to the March Hare's house. He disappears, but his grin remains behind to float on its own in the air, prompting Alice to remark that she has often seen a cat without a grin, but never a grin without a cat. So, what I'm trying to basically tell you guys by highlighting this is that, yeah, basically the Cheshire Cat comes in a similar way, but there are no footmen, there is no Duchess, or any of that stuff. Disney decided to sort of scrap that. And I guess I could understand why, because it doesn't seem to really go anywhere. And then having the whole thing with the baby turning into a pig, I thought that was rather interesting, but something sort of dreamlike that could make sense for the most part if you're dreaming. But it doesn't seem to really attribute to anything to Alice's really journey. But for the most part, I think it does try to grasp the sense of the world that Alice is in, but does it through these kinds of obscure characters that she comes across, whereas the Disney version, I think, relies more on visuals than really giving you all these like different characters, even though the Disney work does encompass a lot of the characters that are within the book. And basically in the Disney version, none of this frog footman, no Duchess, she doesn't go to any other house. She basically is just wandering around. And then she stumbles upon the Cheshire Cat, and basically the Cheshire Cat tells her, you know, where to go. If you want to go to this place, you go there. And yeah, he kind of disappears in that same way with that grin on his face and sort of the creepiness and the sheer sort of, I guess, absurdity of Wonderland is pretty much displayed, I think, in the Cheshire Cat, because he is rather strange. But for the most part, it does allow, that point does allow for the plot to move forward. And basically, that's how the Disney version sort of plays out. And then once she comes across this house, basically what happens is pretty much what sort of happens in the story as well, in the original work. She comes to the house, and then she sees the Mad Hatter, she sees the March Hare, and she sees the little mouse, the little sleepy mouse, similar into the same thing in the Disney version, and they do have their like little talks about riddles and things of that such. And the only difference is that there's a really clear emphasis in the Disney version of this holiday called, probably something you guys have all heard of, the Unbirthday. Now you might be wondering, where did the Unbirthday actually come from? It actually came from the Looking Glass. It's actually when Alice comes across Humpty Dumpty, not kidding you, and basically he says that he got a necklace as an unbirthday present from somebody. Again, that's basically how the Disney version decided, we're going to take that and we're going to use that in this part of the story. And I thought that was really interesting. I think that really worked for Disney because they could make it seem a little bit more odd and out there, especially since the Mad Hatter and the March Hare are supposed to kind of be sort of really one of the more out there characters. So for the most part, that's pretty much how it happens. In the original work also, the rabbit does not appear, but in the Disney work, the rabbit does appear at one point, and they like mess with his clock. You'll kind of see how that plays out if you watch it. And basically, that's pretty much the end of that particular point in the Disney work with the rabbit being involved, and in the original work where the rabbit is not involved and there's no unbirthday stuff. It's just Alice being around these two crazy characters for a while and having like riddle conversations. And then she decides, the riddles, this whole party is really stupid. So she leaves. Similar like in the Disney version. Same reasoning. And then in the Disney version, it goes off on its own thing. And it's similar with the flowers. It decides that it wants to have a scene where Alice is trying to find her way home. She just wants to go home. She just wants to find a place to take her home because she's tired of this world. She just wants to escape. She wants to go away, and she wants to be done. So basically we have a whole scene and our whole part where she's trying to find her way home. And then basically the cat appears and then tells her where the queen is. And for some reason, I guess, Alice sort of I guess gets intrigued by that idea of there, I guess, being a queen, and he basically shows her directly where the path is to the queen. In the original work, she just comes across the cards. It's not like she's directed by the Cheshire Cat to where the cards are. She just sort of happens to stumble upon the cards. And basically these cards are like, walking cards. And what they're doing is they're painting the roses red, like in the Disney work. And the reason why is because, the queen will have their head. It's the same thing, same concept, same point. And then this is where I think it gets the most different, and I'm going to try to explain this like as clearly as I can, but this is just talking original. This is basically what happens in the original up to the point of the revelation of the queen and everybody else, like the king and the rabbit again, who appears again. But basically, the Queen of Hearts then orders the cat to be beheaded, only to have her executioner complain that it is impossible, since that head is all that can be seen of him. Because the cat belongs to the Duchess, the Queen is prompted to release the Duchess from prison to resolve the matter. That's sort of how it plays out. But again, completely different in the Disney version. Also, what's important to note is that the croquet game, practically the same thing. Flamingos as the stick, and then the hedgehogs as the balls. Same game, same sort of scenario, same amount of like chaos, because obviously Alice doesn't know how to play with flamingos and hedgehogs. So basically, in the Disney version, the queen never sees the cat. The queen doesn't know the existence of the cat. Unlike in the original work that I've just read off to you. And basically what ends up happening in the Disney version is that the cat ends up causing some mischief, and this causes Alice to be put on trial, because again, the Cheshire Cat has the ability to sort of disappear, so he sort of messes with the queen, and him messing with the queen ends up getting Alice in trouble. So that's something worth noting, I think, as far as the plot is concerned. And also important to note that Alice does keep the mushrooms in the Disney version that the caterpillar told her would help her grow or help her shrink. Important part to note. But as I continue on explaining this, in the original work it continues with the Duchess is brought to the croquet ground at Alice's request. She ruminates on finding morals in everything around her. The Queen of Hearts dismisses her on the threat of execution, and she introduces Alice to Gryphon, who takes her to the Mock Turtle. The Mock Turtle is very sad, even though it has no sorrow. He tries to tell his story about how he used to be a real turtle in school, which the Griffin interrupts so that they can play a game. The Mock Turtle and the Griffin dance to the Lobster Chorale, while Alice recites, rather incorrectly, "'Tis the voice of the lobster." The Mock Turtle sings them beautiful soup, during which Gryphon drags Alice away from the impending trial. For an impending trial. And in case you guys don't know what a Gryphon is, it has the head, talons, and wings of an eagle, but with the sort of the back or the body part of a lion. That was all Lewis's Carol's doing. I just made it up. I just made up that whole thing. So again, totally played out differently in the original work, and trying to encompass the Duchess and then trying to encompass these other characters that seem sort of maybe pointless, or maybe try to drag it out a bit, or try to make it a little bit more absurd. But basically, Alice attends a trial whereby the Knaves of the Heart is accused of stealing the Queen's tarts. Okay, that's basically the trial in the original work. In the Disney work, Alice is accused of messing sort of with the game. And she is put on trial. Big difference. And then the jury is composed of various animals, including Bill the Lizard. The White Rabbit is the court's trumpeter, and the judge is the King of Hearts. Again, kind of similar scenario in the Disney version. The same animals are kind of within the same crowd. I think the lizard, maybe the lizard was part of the trial. Or was on the jury. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody could spot that, because I did watch the Disney version, but I just can't remember right now. But basically during the proceedings, Alice finds that she is steadily growing larger. And again, this is the original work. The original work doesn't seem to really offer an explanation so much as to why she grows. She just grows. Basically she sort of sees the kind of absurdity of the trial, and she kind of calls people out on it, and basically, it calls a bunch of different witnesses, Mad Hatter and the Duchess's cook. And then Alice ends up being called up as a witness, and she accidentally knocks over the jury box with the animals inside them, and the king orders the animals to be placed back into their seats before the trial continues. The king and queen order Alice to be gone, citing Rule 42, all persons more than a mile high to leave the court. That's, again, the same in the Disney version. But again, Disney, I think, really wanted to kind of simplify this because, again, this can be a little bit more confusing because there are a lot more characters and there's a lot being kind of shoved at you. But that Rule 42 is in there. If you watch the Disney version, you'll see that they still kept that Rule 42. You know, you can't be a mile high, more than a mile high rule in there. But Alice disputes their judgment and refuses to leave. She argues with the King and Queen of Hearts over the ridiculous proceedings, eventually refusing to hold her tongue. The Queen shouts off with her head, but Alice is unafraid, calling them out as just a pack of cards. Just as they start to swarm over her, Alice's sister wakes her up for tea, brushing what turns out to be some leaves and not a shower of playing cards from Alice's face. Alice leaves her sister on the bank to imagine all the curious happenings for herself. So that's basically how the original work sort of plays itself out, from what I've explained to you. Disney version, totally different. Basically, how it plays out is that, you know, everything is on Alice. So it would kind of make more sense that this would really frustrate Alice because it's about her, and they're falsely accusing her of things that she never did, and then they're doing really pointless stuff in order to try to make her seem guilty. And then this totally kind of, and when you watch the Disney version, you'll totally see how this absurdity sort of ensues. But again, it doesn't mean that she just grows just because she can. She does use the mushrooms to grow. The problem is that she, and I did see this in the Disney version, she likes both. And as you know, one mushroom makes you shrink, one mushroom makes you grow. So at one point, it does make her grow really big, and when she does grow really big, she does really stand up for herself and really calls the queen out on her BS. And as she's saying this, she suddenly starts to shrink and then shrink again because the other mushroom it's doing its magic, and then she shrinks back to the way she was. So yeah, this doesn't work to her advantage at all because now, since the queen is such a hothead, and she's basically a hothead throughout the entire book, and she is a hothead in general in the Disney version as well, you'll see she pretty much says the same thing off with her head. But it's not like Alice says, you know what, this is just a dream, I know it's just a dream, and I'll wake up. Unlike sort of how the original work plays out from what I just told you. Instead, she basically is pursued in a chase. She basically just runs for it. She just runs away from the trial, just tries to get away. And as she's running, she finally comes across the door. The door that she had that she went across in the beginning. And basically the door tells her, like, hey, you know what, you're on the other side, because, again, the door is a character in the Disney version. And she sees that she's asleep, and then she realizes, okay, I just need to tell myself to wake up, and then it'll all, you know, come together. And then basically she just kind of wakes up. And, you know, and then basically she offers to sort of explain certain things that kind of happen to her, because, you know, she kind of just wakes up and is kind of freaked out at what she just experienced. And then her sister just kind of looks at her and goes, okay, maybe this is enough for today. Let's just go have some tea. And that's basically how the Disney version decides to end it. Instead of the sister kind of contemplating a little bit about, what actually happened here? Instead, it's kind of, the dream is just sort of left like, oh, it's just a child fantasy, you know, it's just childish talk, and let's just go back into the real world now. That's kind of how the Disney version plays itself out. So basically, from what I told you, that's pretty much the main big stuff in there that really is different. Because again, these versions are not really close together. They're very kind of obscure at times. I think though the Disney version, because it's done in this animation medium, it can show you how things transform or how things are a little bit more there, and the world that they create, it feels really real, at least from my perspective. I don't think they tried to make it sort of dreamlike. I think they really did try to make it seem like she was actually in another world. But in the original, you can kind of sense that the author wanted to make it sort of more obscure. And I think that's has to do maybe with the medium that it's in. Because when you're in a book world, you don't really need to explain why things disappear. You can just say they disappear. Unlike the animation where it actually shows you how, and sort of creates these things that are just so odd and out there that couldn't really be really explained in a original work. So for the most part, they're both very interesting. I didn't really grow up with Alice in Wonderland, but I encourage people to read it and to take whatever they can out of it. For me, it was really fun to research and to get basically what I could get out of it. But yeah, I'll make sure to put all the links in the description for the Looking Glass and for the Adventures of Alice in Wonderland, and I'll make sure to put in the Disney work as well. I'm surprised I was able to go through it this fast, but I'm really happy that I was able to do it because, again, it is kind of, one of those things where the differences, once you kind of read and understand the differences, you'll kind of get what Disney decided to do. Disney just wanted to kind of bring the two works together and try to make the stuff that might be more interesting to put it more in it and observe that more instead of dragging everything out that may not be as interesting or as appealing. But some stuff that may be in the Looking Glass and may as well be in the Adventures of Alice in Wonderland may appeal to you. There are some stuff from the Looking Glass that I did not mention, but again, that's because we're talking about both the works, and if I were to talk about just through the Looking Glass, then it wouldn't be a Disney versus original work. But I will try to make a link into the description, so if you want to read more about the Looking Glass, definitely gives you a good summary detail of basically what these works, both of these works, were trying to do and how maybe they're different. And for the most part, I think that's really all I can say. The Disney work is really well done. I do feel though that the world feels a little bit more real than in the book, because the book kind of tries to play into this idea of that it is a dream, it is something out of fantasy, in a child's mind, so to speak. But it's not necessarily something that's that I guess could be classified as so, how do you say, something as so realistic in that medium. Because again, the original work is just 1800s writing, and the Disney work is 1950s animation. So you are going to get different interpretations, but for the most part, I have to say that they're both really well done. Really enjoy watching them or reading them, and yeah, definitely worth considering if you really like this kind of trippy sort of thing. The original works as well as the Disney work, I think, are kind of because they can get trippy at times and just in their different ways. But for the most part, I think that's really everything that I could bring up about Alice in Wonderland. Any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time, bye-bye, everybody.